The following statement I thought was never ever going to come out of my mouth, but it is. If I had somebody ask me right now to take a bit of a flyer and make a bet on a team that could surprise and make the Super Bowl in the 2013 NFL season, I would say it would be the Cincinnati Bengals. If I had somebody come up to me that wanted to become a football fan but didn't really care what team they rooted for, and they said, well, what team could I get behind, root for, and start off on the ground running and potentially enjoy some success as a fan early on, I would also tell them the Cincinnati Bengals. I can't believe those statements just came out of my mouth, but they have. This is a Bengals team that is young, that has some big time talent in some key spots, and with a couple of holes being filled, perhaps, is a legitimate threat to be a Super Bowl contender very, very soon. They made the playoffs in 2012 for the second straight season, went 10-6, and finished second in the AFC North. They lost to the Texans in the wild card round of the playoffs. When I look at this Bengals team, this is a team on offense that Andy Dalton has been a nice surprise to a certain degree these past two seasons. Carson Who, 3,600 passing yards, 26 touchdowns. Dalton's been good. I wouldn't go so far as to say he's been great, but he's been good, and at moments he's been very good. One concern would be his relatively poor performance in the playoffs the previous two seasons. That would be a little bit concerning going forward. But he is a very young quarterback. This is a guy that you definitely got great value out of taken in the second round. The sky's the limit potentially for him. They got A.J. Green in the first round in 2011, and he has quickly established himself not only as a number one wide receiver, but as one of the perhaps five best receivers in all of the NFL, even with some of the inconsistencies he has catching the ball at times. 97 catches, 1,350 yards, 11 touchdowns. They bring in Ben Jarvis Green Ellis to fill a void at running back. And he was okay, but nothing special, but he still had a 1,000-yard season. This is a Bengals offense that finished 12th in points scored in the league. One of the bigger concerns for me then, other than, still a somewhat lackluster running game, especially in a division in the AFC North where you almost have to have one in order to compete, is the fact that they were 27th in the league in third down percentage. So whether that be to having too many third and longs or not being able to run the ball on 3rd and 1 and 3rd and 2, they weren't converting a very high percentage of third down opportunities. And third down percentage is a very key statistic when you're talking about NFL offensive success, especially for really good teams. On the defensive side of the ball, there is a lot to like with this team. I think Browns owner Mike Brown has finally been rewarded for sticking behind Marvin Lewis and not getting rid of him when he had plenty of chances to, frankly. He stood behind his guy, and it's paying off. This defense finished 8th in points allowed, 6th in total yards allowed, 7th in passing yards allowed, had the 3rd best sack total in the NFL. This is a young defense. Even with some of the holes that they have, they still have some big-time players on the defensive side of the ball, and this is a defense that over the next year or two could potentially become even better to the point where they are truly a dominant defense. Perhaps the single most impressive thing about the Cincinnati Bengals and where they're positioned going into this offseason, into the 2013 season, is they're a young team with a lot of talent, with a shit ton of salary cap space. They've got, I think it's going to be over 50, if not $55 million of cap space. And when you look at some of the free agents they have, they're, unless he keeps getting arrested at airports, Andre Smith, they'll probably repay, former first-round pick. Michael Johnson is probably in for a nice payday. I don't think they're going to let him go anywhere. Their punter, Kevin Huber, I'm sure they'll pay him. Manny Lawson, maybe, maybe not. But they don't have a lot of high-priority free agents other than that. Now, this is a team that could try and go buck wild in free agency, but I don't expect them to do that. They may bring in one or two guys of a certain level, but I would expect they'd use some of that salary cap space to do the right thing and give a long-term deal to a stud like Geno Watkins, for example. But there's a lot to like here. You've got a young team with talent in some key spots on offense, a defense that is young, athletic, that plays well and has room to grow and improve, and a lot of salary cap space. The Bengals could be even scarier in the next couple of seasons, and I truly mean that. And part of the reason for that is, you guessed it, after years of being the Bengals, over the past 5 years, they finally started to figure out how that little thing called the NFL draft really works. The Bengals were called the Bungles, especially in the 90s, and for good reason. And part of the reason for that was their consistent failures in the NFL draft, whether that's taking David Klingler 6 overall in the 92 draft, whether that was trading up to number 1 to take Kajana Carter in 95, whatever the case might be. For many years, the Bengals just didn't understand how to run a draft. They just didn't, and that's why they stunk so bad throughout pretty much all of the 90s. Now, in the 2000s, they had moments where they got it a little bit better in the draft, and they had some bad drafts. But over the past 4 to 5 years in particular, the Bengals have been a lot more efficient, a lot more effective when it comes to playing the draft game. Now, 2008 really wasn't a good draft. There's not really much there of note for them at all. 2009 was when it really started to get better for them. They drafted Andre Smith in the first round. You got Michael Johnson in the third round. You got Kevin Huber, your punter, later on in the draft. So a couple of key contributors there. 2010, you got Jermaine Gresham, your tight end, in the first round. Maybe your best player on your defense for sure, if not your entire team, Geno Atkins, defensive tackle. You got him in the fourth round. 2011, you found your number 1 wide receiver with the 4th overall pick in A.J. Green. Then you come back in the second round and you find your quarterback in Andy Dalton. You take a guard later on in the draft in Bowling. Again, some key contributors, especially on the offensive side of the ball. No wonder they made the playoffs in 2011. A couple of straight drafts that brought them some key contributors, and you put in some big pieces in the right places on offense, and there you go. And 2012, this past year's draft, I was a really big fan of the Bengals draft after the 3 days of the 2012 NFL draft, that is. And there's a reason for that. I thought they addressed some key holes and some key needs while sticking to a best player available approach. I really like some of the talents they got. You know, even Dre Kirkpatrick, their first round pick, didn't play much. So they got quite a bit out of their draft class this year, and Kirkpatrick barely played due to injury. But Zeitler started every game at guard on that offensive line, and I think he's going to be a productive player, if not a stud for them on that line for many years. Devin Still, I think, has promise as a defensive tackle who they took in the second round. I really like Mohamed Sanu, the wide receiver from Rutgers that they took in the third round. I think potentially he could be the guy that steps up to be the Robin to A.J. Green's Batman in that receiving corps. Orson Charles, the 4th round tight end. I think he has a lot of upside to at least be a nice pass-catching complement to Jermaine Gresham at the tight end position. And then taking a guy like Marvin Jones and getting him in the 5th round. I'd expect him in 2013 and beyond to be a little bit more of a valuable contributor in that wide receiving corps. So they've been able to hit on first-round picks, and they've also been able to hit on picks and guys in the second round and in the middle rounds of the draft. So it's not hard to figure out why the Bengals have made the playoffs the past 2 years, and frankly, their needle is only pointing up. As I mentioned before, I really believe that the Bengals are on the cusp of taking that next step. Now, part of taking that next step is going to involve Andy Dalton, because you could surround him with all of these great players all over the place, but Dalton has to play a little bit better in bigger games and in bigger moments and rise to the occasion in the playoffs in particular. I'm not saying he can't. I'm not saying he can. But let's be honest. It's the most important position in the NFL. And Dalton will have to take that step and get up to that next level if this team truly is able to realize their full potential at some point. Because I think their potential is potentially winning a Super Bowl. I really do. And another good draft class in 2013 could really help them on that path. Now, to me, they have needs in places like running back. I think they need a true feature back. I don't think the law firm of Ben Jarvis Green Ellis is going to get it done. They have needs at linebacker. Manny Lawson was less than spectacular, and Ray Malaluga, a guy I liked a lot coming out of USC, has just been very bad. I think they have needs at safety. They could really use a playmaking safety in the back part of their secondary. I really do. But it would be hard to fault the Bengals at this point in time for just sticking true to the draft board and taking the best player available regardless of position. So with their first pick at pick number 21, they could take a running back, maybe Eddie Lacy from Alabama or Giovanni Bernard from North Carolina. Maybe they like a wide receiver like a DeAndre Hopkins for Clemson, or maybe if a Keenan Allen drops to them, they really like him. Maybe they want to focus on the interior of their offensive line. If Jonathan Cooper's there, the guard center from North Carolina, they take him at 21. They could focus a lot on outside linebackers like Deion Jordan or Alec Ogletree, who I think would make a world of sense for them. They could focus on the inside linebacker position, whether that be Kevin Minner from LSU, Arthur Brown from Kansas State, perhaps Monte Teo from Notre Dame. They could focus on safety, Kenny Vaccaro from Texas, Eric Reed from LSU, Matt Elam from Florida. The potential of possibilities there is quite frankly endless because of the Bengals' success over the past several drafts. They put themselves in a very good position where, yes, they have needs, but not any one need is necessarily so glaring. They're almost more like nice to fix instead of have to need to fixes. And when you're in that position, you could really set yourself up for long-term success because you could say, well, we're not drafting this guy because we're trying to necessarily just plug an immediate hole. So this is more important. We're just taking guys that are the best talents that at some point in time will find their way onto the football field and have the best chance to be long-term, damn good NFL players. Now, if I was running the draft board, I would give a lot of consideration to an Eddie Lacy or Giovanni Bernard at 21, or a Jonathan Cooper at 21, or somebody like an Ogletree, or maybe a Kevin Minter or Monte Teo at 21. Those would be some of the guys I would focus on. But if somebody else dropped, like a Keenan Allen dropped to 21, I'm probably going to take him because he might be what I feel at that point the best player available on the board. If a Jarvis Jones from Georgia drops because of the concerns over his spinal stenosis, I would imagine even if you question whether or not he fit as a 4-3 strong side linebacker, he's just too good of a talent to pass up on. You find a way to get that type of talent and player on the football field. Those are the type of picks that you take. They might have some risk, but boy, the payoff could be incredibly huge. So this Bengals team, I'm very curious to see what they do this offseason. Will they get a little spend happy in free agency? Maybe they go after somebody like a Greg Jennings and say, fuck it, we're going to buy us a number 2 wide receiver opposite A.J. Green. That might not be a bad decision. They'll take some of that money that they have under the cap and give long-term deals to guys like Andre Smith and Michael Johnson and Geno Atkins. Good decisions. Those would be the right things to do. But hopefully they don't take their eye off of the ball when it comes to the draft, because that's been a key component of their success the past 2 seasons, and is ultimately, along, like I mentioned before, with the improvement of Andy Dalton at the quarterback position, if you continue to do well in this draft, that's going to be the Bengals' ultimate key to, within perhaps the next 2 seasons, getting to the promised land and potentially hoisting a Lombardi trophy.